people said, well, look, he spent years saying, lock her up about Hillary Clinton. There's now footage of him saying it multiple times. The crowd baying for blood, lock her up, lock her up. Has he brought that on himself?
If you take everything that Donald Trump says at pure face value, you're a fool.
We talk about like not grading presidents on a curve, but then earlier we said we take Biden's rhetoric.
Oh no,
more
I totally
seriously
grade
than Trump's.
I 100% grade presidents on a curve. Are you kidding?
Oh, okay.
I grade pretty much everybody on a curve.
Then I feel like
I don't treat my 7-year-old the same way
like-
that I treat my 9-year-old.
Sure, but
And
I don't
treat Trump the same way I
like
treat
that.
Obama.
It feels like we're treating Donald Trump like a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old. I think we should treat him like the president of the United States. I don't think having a president that has taken
Yet again, self-professed nonpartisan journalist Piers Morgan proves that when it comes to convicted felon Donald Trump, he is in fact quite partisan, demonstrated by this recent conversation with Ben Shapiro, who also said some pretty strange things in Trump's defense, and we've got to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to look at in this conversation between Morgan and Shapiro. Again, I want to remind you that when Morgan is at his best, I think he's a pretty good interviewer, debater, and moderator, but that tends to be more on foreign policy issues. When it comes to domestic politics, and Donald Trump in particular, he's just unreliable, and he's openly partisan despite his protestations to the contrary. As a matter of fact, when it comes to Trump, that mask that had been slipping finally fell off during a conversation yesterday with Charlemagne the God, host of The Breakfast Club. And then Piers Morgan just admitted flat out, he's like, listen, even with the quote unquote more serious cases, the documents case against Trump in Florida, the Washington, D.C. election case, the Fulton County, Georgia election case, he doesn't think Trump should be prosecuted because he was a former president, he's a controversial figure, and you can't guarantee him an impartial jury. And so when Charlemagne the God was like, damn, okay, well, how do we hold people like Trump accountable? Piers Morgan's like, I don't know, impeachment? And when Charlemagne the God was like, yeah, but we did impeach and it still didn't hold him accountable, Morgan's like, I don't know, that's just what you're left with. He wants to rule out entirely, make Donald Trump completely above the law. That is Piers Morgan's position. So weird stuff. Now I want to play the clip from this conversation with Shapiro, which annoys me the most, which is the least intellectually honest of the clips I'm going to show you. And this, by the way, is the closest thing to a tough question that Morgan poses to Shapiro.
I mean, Trump, you know, the other side looking at it, people said, well, look, he spent years saying, lock her up about Hillary Clinton. There's now footage of him saying it multiple times. The crowd baying for blood, lock her up, lock her up. Has he brought that on himself?
Well, I mean, again, I think that when Donald Trump's epitaph is written, it's going to say Donald Trump 45th and maybe 47th president of the United States. He said a lot of bleep. And I think that the difference between Donald Trump saying things like lock her up and Joe Biden's DOJ and his various allies in the states actually attempting to lock up his political opposition, there's a wide difference right there. This has always been one of the bizarre things about how people pretend to interpret Trump. I mean, Piers, you know Donald Trump. I've met Donald Trump and covered him for years, obviously. If you take everything that Donald Trump says at pure face value, you're a fool.
Yeah,
I mean, you're really a fool. And I think
agree.
everybody knows that, including the voting public. And so when he goes out there and he says colorful things like lock her up, does anyone, and then he didn't do it. He didn't do it. He was president of the United States. His DOJ was in charge, and he didn't do it. And Joe Biden's been in charge for 3 years. And guess what? His DOJ is coming after Donald Trump in 2 separate jurisdictions, in Florida and in D.C. You got local DAs in Atlanta and New York going after Donald Trump. Kind of weird how it happens whenever it's the Democrats, but when Republicans talk about it, somehow that's equivalent. I don't buy it.
Well, I keep...
So this is the frustrating thing with Shapiro. Listen to how he describes it. He's like, listen, when a Republican publicly campaigns on prosecuting his or her political opponents, even as the sitting president, which Trump did in 2020, that's, quote, colorful. It's colorful. He says, you're a fool if you take Trump's words at face value. And this, by the way, is the guy he's backing for president, that he's campaigning for, that he's fundraising for. And what it comes down to is a gross double standard that Shapiro would never tolerate, much like Morgan, for President Biden and the Democrats. See, rhetoric matters when it's Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or Barack Obama. Then it matters. Ben Shapiro famously wrote that President Obama was a fascist because he gave a State of the Union address. That's just a speech. Rhetoric matters when it comes from Obama. He's also said that, President Biden His rhetoric surrounding the Supreme Court is incredibly dangerous. Even though Joe Biden hasn't threatened to pack the court, the fact that other Democrats want to pack the court, that's dangerous rhetoric. So rhetoric matters when it comes to Democrats. Rhetoric matters when it comes to President Biden apparently articulating, a green energy agenda. He says that's dangerous because it impacts the market. The president or a presidential candidate, more particularly when Biden was a candidate, him speaking about a pro-green energy agenda, well, that actually stifled oil production. And because a presidential candidate's words matter when it's a Democrat and it's convenient for Shapiro. But when it's a Republican presidential candidate and those words are inconvenient, well, it's just, quote, colorful language. When Trump is the sitting president and publicly tries to jail his opponents, it's also colorful language. Shapiro's a hypocrite. That's an indefensible double standard. And by the way, it's nothing new. I think we talked about this in a previous video, but when our buddy Destiny debated Shapiro, Shapiro said something really stupid and weird to hear one adult man say about a 77-year-old adult male who was the president and is trying to be the president again. This is what he says about Donald Trump rhetoric and standards.
You probably should actually just appoint him president and then he can't run again.
Here's another broad argument that I don't like in favor of Trump. And this was brought up earlier in terms of we talk about not grading presidents on a curve. But then earlier we said we take Biden's rhetoric.
Oh, no, I totally grade Trump. I 100% grade presidents on a curve. Are you kidding?
Oh, okay.
I grade pretty much everybody on a curve.
Then I feel like
I don't treat my 7-year-old the same way that I treat my 9-year-old.
Sure, but I don't like that
Obama.
It feels like we're treating Donald Trump like a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old. I think we should treat him like the president of the United States. I don't think having a president that has taken concrete steps to prevent the transfer of power, which he did with the electorate's sham, which he did with Pence, and which he did with trying to capitalize on the J6 violence, a president that's taken concrete steps towards cooing the government, essentially. I don't know why that guy, we'd say, well, it's Trump, he does Trump things. The guardrails held, we'll probably hold next time.
Absolutely. And Shapiro had no satisfying answer to that, by the way. And again, you even see the face when Destiny's like, hey, how about we treat this 77-year-old former president, potential future president, like an adult who was the occupant of the most powerful and important office in the world? And Shapiro's like, well, that's just stupid. Who would do that? It's because it's politically convenient for Shapiro. There is no defensible reason for this double standard other than that he likes Republicans, he hates Democrats. Well, I take the position, as I imagine most people do, that actually rhetoric does matter, and it should matter when it's coming from somebody that powerful and that consequential, regardless if they have an R next to their name or a D. Donald Trump, as the sitting president of the United States, repeatedly publicly called for his attorney general, Bill Barr, to prosecute Barack Obama, an ex-president. Again, I thought we're not supposed to prosecute former presidents. Clearly, Trump didn't think so at the time, which is why he called for Obama to be prosecuted, thus proving objectively that Trump is an unprincipled, hypocritical loser whom we should mock relentlessly, and that people who defend that ever-changing standard are also unprincipled, hypocritical losers whom we should mock relentlessly. But as the sitting president, Trump also publicly called for Hillary Clinton to be prosecuted in 2020. We talked about this. There's a great article on MSNBC talking about how Donald Trump tries to rewrite reality and engage in revisionist history when it comes to targeting Hillary Clinton. He did repeatedly pressure his Department of Justice to go after Hillary Clinton after he won the election. The fact that they chose not to, or perhaps they did but ultimately didn't bring charges, perhaps because they didn't think there was an actual legal predicate to do it beyond all reasonable doubt, it doesn't matter. Trump tried. The fact that he failed, we don't give him credit for failing. Ben Shapiro is an attorney. He's a Harvard-educated attorney. He would not, under any circumstances, give credit to an attempted murderer for failing in the murder attempt. But again, when it comes to Trump, we have to grade Trump on a curve. And that's the reality. Ben Shapiro holds the most obscure pro-Democrat Twitter account to a higher ethical standard and a higher degree of responsibility than Donald Trump as a presidential candidate, as a former president, or as the sitting president. And so does Piers Morgan. It's gross. It's completely indefensible. But I want to play some other clips as well. We're going to start with this one too, in which Shapiro weighs in on Hunter Biden and also the potential implications of Donald Trump's criminal conviction.
The bottom line here is that going to impact the presidential race in any serious way? Not particularly. The only thing it might do, actually, is have a rally around the flag effect for Donald Trump on the right side of the aisle, and it might actually impact independents such that they look at what happened here and they say to themselves, the guy who keeps preaching about democracy being under threat from Donald Trump, that guy's party seems very focused on putting his chief political opponent, who right now is winning the swing states, in jail.
Right. I mean,
so that may be the ultimate effect. I'm not going to rule out anything. I'm a cynic by nature. It's entirely possible that Donald Trump will appeal, that his conviction will be overturned on appeal, that he will never see a single day in jail, or that he won't have to pay a fine. And it's entirely possible that he'll still win the upcoming election. I don't doubt any of that. But it is simply a fact that right now the polls are not in Trump's favor. The majority of Americans in poll after poll after poll approve of Trump's guilty verdict. And 49% of independents, since Ben Shapiro referenced independents, 49% of them believe he should drop out today, that he should end his campaign today. Nearly half think he should end his campaign today. That's not good, okay? And again, if you look at the polls, the breakdown is that a majority of Americans, 54% to 40%, believe that Donald Trump is not mentally fit for office. Again, these polls may change. It's entirely possible. But right now, the data show bad news for Trump compared to good news. Now, I will say that reportedly, there's some good news for Trump with respect to fundraising, that he raked in a ton of money in the 24 hours after his conviction. And that is also important because he's been lagging behind President Biden's fundraising efforts. That may help him close the gap within a relatively short order. We don't know. But for Shapiro to say, it's either not going to matter or it's all good news for Trump is just pure cope. In this clip, he talks about Hunter Biden, President Biden's civilian son, who, as we speak, is in trial on federal charges by a Trump-appointed attorney, U.S. attorney, who is now upgraded to special counsel, and the case is being overseen by a Trump-appointed judge.
In Manhattan. Meanwhile, you have the president's son who's being brought up on federal charges. That's happening in Wilmington. So Wilmington, Delaware, you would assume that's going to be a pretty friendly place for Hunter Biden to be brought up on charges. All of this starts to call into question the justice system. Obviously, listen, we all have critiques of the criminal justice system here in the United States. We disagreed with particular verdicts. But on this one, it is so eminently clear that there is no charge that should have been leveled here against Donald Trump.
So what's funny about him referencing Hunter Biden is a couple of things. Again, I just want to be clear about this. For every argument you can make that Donald Trump should not have been charged in Manhattan, let alone convicted, and there are legal experts, Ellie Honig from CNN, for example, who is not, a strident Trump supporter. Andy McCarthy is a pro-Trump legal analyst on Fox News, so I take his opinions with a grain of salt. But the bottom line, there are legal experts who say this case against Trump should not have been brought. There are also legal experts who say it should have and the conviction was correct. Right? So this is a matter of controversy in the legal community. Well, that's the very same situation for the Hunter Biden trial. There are legal experts who say that if it were not, Hunter Biden, if he had a different last name, if there wasn't scrutiny, if the Justice Department wasn't compelled to demonstrate, basically use him as a sacrificial lamb to show that they are not in fact partisan, that this case would have never been brought. As a matter of fact, there's this great op-ed in the USA Today op-ed section, Charles M. Oberle. He says, I ran the office prosecuting Hunter Biden. I can't fathom why this trial is happening. You have Trey Gowdy, a former Republican congressman who led the Benghazi investigations. Presumably Shapiro's a big fan. Well, he used to be a prosecutor, and he even said a few days ago on the Fox Propaganda Network, we did a video about it, that these charges would have never been brought against Hunter Biden if it had been a different person. Shapiro doesn't have any complaints about that. He doesn't care, because as long as it hurts President Biden or a Democrat, he's for it. But Donald Trump, again, must be graded on a curve, not just politically, but legally. So super gross stuff from Piers Morgan and Ben Shapiro. Piers Morgan in many ways, even more in particular, because he claims to be a nonpartisan journalist. Shapiro is an open and Republican and conservative. Now, he's not nearly as principled as he says he wants to be because, again, the hypocrisy is stunning. But it just makes you wonder, what could Trump do to get these people to back off their support? I believe that when Donald Trump said that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote, he was referring to the likes of Ben Shapiro. And yes, even Piers Morgan, if Piers Morgan could vote. Let me know what you think in the comments.